All right, so Paul didn't want us to do this talk because he doesn't like commercials. So it's not supposed to be a commercial. Let's start with that. First and foremost, how many of you are already using or have used the alpha? 2.0 alpha bits. Downloaded, fired them up, tried it a little bit. Can I see show of hands? Other than Influx people in the room. That would be good. Okay, so that means most of you haven't seen the user experience. Is that a fair assumption? Nodding heads would be good? Okay, good. All right, so we're going to go through some of that. Now, Paul talked through some of the details. I wanted to provide you a little bit of the motivation behind it and some of the feedback that we've gotten. How many folks in the room are cloud customers already? Okay, enterprise, I know, yes, thank you. All right, how many of you are deployed on a cloud infrastructure provider like AWS, Google? Okay, how many of you are either looking at or moving towards in the next 12 months? Nobody. We got a lot of box. Oh wait, a couple hands. These are the slow hands. Is that because of budgeting cycles, compliance? Like where are you in the cycle of this?
We're just experimenting still.
Experimenting. Okay. Well, so let's go through a little bit of history. So Paul and his co-founder took funding, I think it was the A round of funding, and then decided that they should launch the first cloud service based on the open source bits. Get the VCs excited, get that out there.
That's while I was pitching.
Oh, it's even worse. It was while he was pitching the service. So the very first incarnation of Influx Cloud was essentially the open source bits on DigitalOcean. Okay, database in the sky. We'll run it for you, we'll manage it for you, but super limited visibility, super limited access. You had to download the CLI and to get administrative access to it and play with. And so while we did keep it up and running for you and made sure that everything was available, it's a single tenant instance, and we would spin up individual pods based on folks that signed up. So fast forward with my amazing animation to April of 2016, we then decided to launch the Enterprise Edition on AWS. We provided access to Capacitor as an add-on so that you could do anomaly detection and alerting. We allowed you to do a trial for 14 days of any size. And we continued to provide that single tenant experience for you. But we heard a lot of feedback along the way, like, can you give us more visibility into things? Where's the dashboarding capability? And is there an option to do pay-as-you-go? So we launched in August of 2017 a pay-as-you-go option for storage so that you could have longer-term retention periods on your data. We gave you visibility into the actual running and availability of the services through what we call co-monitoring. And we embedded both chronograph and a limited edition capacitor as part of the standard subscription. So you got all the pieces except for the data collection rolled all into one. And so that sort of leads us to, well, what's next, right? What's the feedback that we've been getting on the service that we've been running now for the last 3 years? And believe me, we've learned a ton of things during that time frame. And the trend in terms of moving to cloud adoption, even though in the room it looked like there were some tentative hands and exploration going up, we've seen a lot of folks getting started with us and continuing their journey as they've scaled up their workloads. But the first thing and the first motivation behind most of the things we're doing in 2.0, can you just make the whole thing even simpler than it already is? Like one of the things that brought me to Influx a couple of years ago was the lack of dependencies, the ability to stand up the bits super quickly, and the ability to get my job done as somebody who had a problem to solve with technology super easy. And for those of you familiar with other technologies, Hadoop, other integration systems, and trying to even install those things, quite a challenge. Influx has none of those things. But despite that, having 4 different projects to assemble and pulling all the bits together, what can we do to make that even simpler? Second, today on Influx Cloud, if you go through registration process, you're presented at some point with a prompt. What size of instance do you want? Well, I don't know. Like, I may have some relative guess of how many servers I'm monitoring, how many devices I have active, the complexity of my machine learning algorithms that are going to access the data. But I have a really hard time assessing how much capacity I'm really going to need. Now, we've tried to provide some hints based on what I would call representative examples that we've had for other clusters that have been running, equivalent workloads. To give you sort of the best guess, I like to think of it as the Scotty Star Trek analogy. He tries to keep you in that green zone, but of course he's left some capacity for yellow and red. So we're trying to provide that green zone experience in the guidelines. But most people, when they get started, they really, really don't have an appreciation for how much capacity they need, which leads you to what? Either you buy too low and then you have to upgrade, or you buy too high and you have excess capacity. Another problem. What if I do know what I need? What if I've been running the open source and I have a very good idea of the amount of workload that I need, and I come to Influx Cloud and I have a set of predefined plans that I see, and my workload exceeds all of them? Now what? Do I walk away? Do I call your sales team? Like, what do I do next? One of the more popular requests. We're taking operational backups on your behalf. Every hour, 3 days of backups. They're there for our access to do restoration. I got a call over the July 4th weekend. Some DBA somewhere dropped a database. It happens. Could you please restore it? These things are very common. But what if you're keeping your operational data online and in Influx Cloud, but you want a trickle feed to you so that you can maintain access and a retention period over a longer period of time than you're keeping online in our online service? How do I get that? Today, you call support. That's probably not the best way to do it, but that's the way that's exposed at the moment. And last but not least, and this is the forehead smacker, why do you need a credit card for a free trial? Like, I'm signing up for a free trial. I want to try your service. I want to try the service. Maybe I've tried the open source bits already. And now I've gotten to a point in the sign-up process where I'm asking you for a credit card. And you're like, this sounds very suspicious. Why is it that you're asking for that? Now, the real motivation from our side is we'd like to transition you from the free trial into the paid service in a smooth period, right? So that you'll become a customer at the end of the 14 days. But it does look a little strange when we say it's a free trial, but now we want you to have some sort of method of payment, correct? So, feedback from all of this. What are we going to do? So our takeaways, and again, we send out a lot of surveys for people who go through the free trials. We're running about 100 of those a month at the moment. And the summary, as we kind of boil it all down, looked like this. Number one, can you just simplify the whole thing? Right? This is both for the cloud experience, open source users across the board. Can you simplify? And so you heard from Paul. We want to improve the time to awesome for all of you in the room. Without a doubt, how can we get your workloads running quickly and as fast as possible on Influx? For cloud specifically, ease the onboarding process, remove that credit card piece, allow me to try as much of the experience in cloud as possible. And then another aspect. If you're doing the data collection part, can you also provide us more pre-built dashboards that reflect the data that you're actually collecting through Telegraph? Second, reduce the complexity of capacity planning and improve my overall capacity management understanding. So how can we speed your time to understanding for what the service will actually cost you, right? You shouldn't have to guess. We know how much the resources that are involved to do certain query loads. How can we expose that to you in a way that you have an expectation of what it is that you're going to pay for and how much it's going to cost you over time? And allow you to scale without engaging with our support team. Today, one of the interesting challenges of running a single tenant service on a fixed plan is we provision you a set of resources. Those resources are available dedicated and unique to you at for all the workloads that you care to run on it. But at some point, if you decide, for example, I'm going to bring 200 more servers online, I'm going to light up another 1 million devices in one of our customers' cases, what's the impact on the service, on the underlying service itself? Do you have enough RAM? Do you have enough CPU? Is the storage in place? Now, storage, you can do pay-as-you-go storage, but if you need more of anything else, today you're calling the support team. I'd like you to be able to scale. I'd like you to have burst capacity that allows you to scale without communicating with us. And last but not least, expand those self-service options. So there's a whole set of things that people want to be able to do, from requesting changes to billing addresses. We see mergers and acquisitions happening. People move office locations. Allow me to do integrated billing with my cloud service provider, for example. Please expose us to a way that we can gain access to all of those things. So what are we going to do? So Paul outlined some of this stuff, and so we'll speed through it so I can get to the actual demo. But for all editions, from a simplification perspective, Flux will be the single unified query language across tasks and interactive query. And the goal in doing this is, and if you've looked at Capacitor at all, and I know you have in some detail, the bar for programming in Capacitor is pretty high. And so learning a single language that will allow you to do that interactive query and transition into tasks that can be executed, scheduled, used for alerting and anomaly detection will provide a powerful way for you to gain access to all the capabilities that we're trying to give you from a platform perspective. Second, centralized configuration and wizards for data collection. This is Capacitor configuration and the scrapers that Paul mentioned. Those will generally be available across all editions. You can do that configuration and gain access to that quickly. We've contemplated and implemented security and multi-tenancy from the beginning. That's available in open source, and obviously then allows us to deliver a multi-tenant service in the cloud, which then unlocks some of these other capabilities that folks have been asking for. And of course, a common and unified API for all the capabilities across all editions. So as Evan mentioned, we want you to build your career on that API because you're able to get things done faster with our technology than any other, and you have the ability to move between editions without thinking about which one you're using, open source, enterprise, or cloud. It's your option based on when you're ready, when you've done the testing, depending on the workload, the environment, the employer, the compliance environment, all of those things come into play. For cloud specifically, simplification, registration process, no credit card required, and we will provide a free tier. Now, the free tier will be rate limited, of course. There'll be limits in place, but this is one of the things where we need your help, which is come explore this with us, help us decide where we want to set those rate limits based on basic use cases. Now, Paul, myself, the other product managers, we're arguing this, as Evan mentioned. We do this, we beat these ideas up all the time, but customer validation and feedback is important to us. So, for example, Paul will say, hey, I want somebody to be able to manage and monitor up to 10 servers in the free tier forever. That seems like a good threshold. And then we'll argue a different point of view. Well, I want to be able to do 1,000 devices. And so, again, customer feedback's super valuable in this area, and we'd love to get that from this crowd for sure. Second thing on the free tier, use it as long as you like. You got a hobby project, you run an aquarium, 5 aquariums, there's a new plugin for the Neptune aquarium environment. You can use the free tier to store all that data. You don't have to wire for 220 and throw it in the cloud, throw it in the free tier, run it as long as you like. That's fine. We want you to gain that experience and expertise with the tech, and we have no problem running it for you. On the capacity management and planning part, you'll usage-based pricing across the board for all the resources you have access to. Okay, so again, delivering a multi-tenant service allows us to do that, not just for storage, but for everything that you're going to use, reads, writes, and storage. And we'll provide clear visibility, which I'll show you in the demo, and calculators to assist with your workload and how it reflects on what it's going to cost you when you move to that tier. And if you'd like reserve capacity, of course, providing some discount for you for committing to that minimum. All right, so with that, enough slides. Let's do live demo. This will be exciting. All right. So first of all, let's walk through a little bit of the registration process. So first and foremost, logging into Cloud 2, first thing is give you clear and concise visibility into the workload and how that relates to the various cost profiles. So we're looking at read units, write units, although that says read twice, and storage, and providing visibility into when you hit this particular rate limits. So for example, if you're on the free tier, you'll get some indication of when you've hit those things. Based on where your subscription or subscriptions live, you'll be able to dial into more detail underneath here. In terms of the billing profile, starting everybody off in the free tier and a specific capacity for that free tier and visibility into that, then providing you with the 2 options. Do you want to move to a pay-as-you-go model, which will then obviously increase or decrease your rate limits, depending on how you want to look at it. And when you do that, you're presented with this sort of summary. Now, the way this works for those that live in New York and New Jersey, it's like Easy Pass. So you can buy a credit block. You can decide the size of that credit block, and then you're going to burn down those credits over time based on your usage. And then when it hits a low water mark, we'll refresh based on the credit card. Makes sense. If you cancel, we'll refund. Obviously, that's required by law, so we're not going to keep your money. And of course, we'll set up notification limits via email, so when you hit that low water mark, we'll let you know what's happening, right? And okay, looks good, you can move on to the next stage. Now, for those of you that are working over a longer period of time and want to take advantage of discounts, you can go into the subscription model, and there's a pricing calculator that's here. Again, if you've been running in the free tier for a while based on some sort of limited workload, you can click the Show Me button, and we'll automatically calculate some massively exorbitant amount of money, monthly or yearly. No, but it's really going to be based off of your workload and whatever has run in the cloud environment. If you believe that that's a burst sort of capacity and you want to dial that down, obviously you can lower the read and write units based on your needs, wants, and desires. And of course, we'll give you the terms and details in terms of what you're going to pay based on that. And you can reserve that minimum capacity. Now, once you've launched the service, either in any of those three modes, the free tier, the pay-as-you-go, or the subscription model, will transition you into the new user experience. Okay? So a couple things. We also are trying to have a little bit of fun with this. As you may imagine, you might see some interesting things, like if anybody speaks Turkish, you'll see I've been welcomed with Merhaba here at the top. If I refresh this a couple times, there may be some Norwegian that shows up here at some point, or this is Welsh. You can learn a new language while you're learning with, how to work with time series data. That's super popular. Okay, so the first thing is we have three sort of predefined flows that you can go through. The first is for configuring a data collector. Now, in this case, we've enabled so far 5 specific configurations. Obviously, I think it was mentioned we have over 200 distinct plugins now in Telegraph, and obviously more of these will come over time. There's a filtering mechanism here. Very simple one to start with is system. We can go ahead and click the configuration option. These are mostly default, so they just come up. So in here, I can go into the Telegraph configuration, and I'm saying I'm going to collect system stats. And this is Tim's laptop in this case. And I can create and verify. Now, the thing that shows up immediately is, okay, so you've got your configuration. How do I get it out to the Telegraph agent? Number one. And number two, I'd like to make sure this is all configured correctly. So as Paul mentioned, the security is built in from the start. And if you want to hack my instance, you can, because I'm splashing my security token right here for you. So take a picture of that. But essentially, you can copy that to the clipboard and place it either as an environment variable or as part of the actual config file for where you're going to run that agent. And then the second is, if you've used Telegraph before, you'll see this connection string here. So you're going to start up the Telegraph agent, and you're going to provide it with --config, and it's pointing at the Influx Cloud instance with a unique identifier for where that config actually lives. And so the idea is between the token and your unique identifier, I can download at startup of Telegraph exactly what I just configured and fire it up. Okay? Now, definitely I see people in production environments are like, no, I would never do that. I'm going to use Puppet, Chef, Ansible, all the tools that Matthew just talked about. Absolutely, that's fine. But for a quick experiment, centralized configuration is available. And if that works for you, great. Go ahead and continue to leverage that going forward. Now, you can also check to see once you've fired this up, and I have one of these fired up, I can listen for data. And in this case, it says, yep, okay, the connection's been found. A Telegraph agent is actually reporting in, and it's ready to go. So now that that's there, I can also see that I've got that Telegraph configuration with, for my system stats. If I want to take a look at, I can rename it. I can look at the setup instructions again, so that's not like a one-time operation. And if I want to take a look at the details of this, I can click on this and I can actually download the config itself. So if I wanted to download that and store it into my source code control system, Git, whatever, you can actually take it from here and continue forward. This is effectively immutable at this point once it's been generated. Okay, there will also be an option to import the configurations in here. That will allow you to bring existing ones in, obviously. At this point, we are just in the sort of creation mode. Okay, so inside of here also, the notion of organizations exist. So today, I've got my organization, all of you, InfluxDays New York City. Inside of that, I've got various members, Tim at New York City Demo, the 2.0 owner as well is listed in there. And I have a single bucket, the default bucket, where I'm storing my system stats at the moment. I'm going to create 2 more buckets in here. The first of which is Cloud Trial Stats. Evan asked for me to provide him with these stats every Monday. They're all events, they're all time series. I know who started, who stopped, right? So I've gathered all that information. So I can create that stats bucket, and I actually am extracting it from a source here. Let me bring this up. So I'm actually generating a file of these events on a regular basis. And I can add that file-based data, which is in line protocol, directly to the system by grabbing that and dropping it in there. And there, the data has been written successfully into the system, and I can hit finish. All right. I'm going to create a separate bucket for long-term stats. So another thing that's pretty common is people want to downsample their data. I think, as Matthew mentioned, keeping the data at 10-second intervals is what I'm collecting it out on my system at the moment. I don't necessarily need the 10-second precision, a day, a week, a month from now. Today is sufficient, so I'm going to go through a little bit of downsampling configuration here in a second. Now, based on what I've done so far, I've got a dashboard that was imported based on the system stats plugin that I enabled, and I can fire that up, and here are the stats that are running in. So again, I get a view of system uptime, what's running on my laptop, CPUs. Luckily, I'm not running something heavier than PowerPoint, and so generally my system looks like it's in a relatively healthy state. I can zoom back out. I've been running this for a little while. Hit the refresh button here. And I can just see how things have been performing over a longer period of time. Again, our goal is to provide the associated pre-built dashboards that go along with those plugins. And as you go through the configuration process, you'll have the option to import those existing dashboards and modify them and take them away from there. From a data exploration perspective, we can go through and look at how this is set up with Flux as the primary language. You'll see in here some new visualization types, histogram, which we haven't had before. Those are all landing, as well as we move the configuration of this off to the side so that you can change things like the geometry, the visualization colors, et cetera, for the different types that show up. And the histogram obviously has different settings than the other. There's a script editor that allows you to build a full-blown Flux scripts. So for example, if I wanted to build something that was looking like not a histogram, so I'm looking here at the query functions that have been executing through the Flux engine. In this case, if I float over these, I can see things like buckets, count, derivative, distinct, filter, and how many times those have been executed over the period of time I'm looking at. In this case, it's a 1-hour interval, and then I'm summarizing those into 5-minute buckets. And I'm just taking the count. So that would be a fairly normal sort of downsampling thing. I may choose to do it over a longer time period. Maybe I want to do it over 10 minutes instead of 5, right? Changes the shape of the whole thing. And now in the Data Explorer, I can turn this into a task. I could also then publish this as a dashboard cell somewhere. But in this case, I'm going to take this and say, Flux functions, It's always good to spell that properly. Don't forget the L. It's always important. Now, there's an option in here for you to set up the frequency which you want the job to run. You can use cron syntax for those of you that are familiar with that, which is the sort of the numbers in the star notation. Or you can decide the frequency. I want this to run every hour since I'm only looking at the last hour of data, and then I'm going to take 6 samples out of that. In this case, I'm going to send those output stats to my long-term stats bucket that I just created, and I'm going to save that task. So now my first task is there. I get visualization of what tasks are active and running, and I can turn those, obviously, tasks on and off. Now again, at the moment, the style of tasks that are supported both in the alpha as well as in cloud are these sort of continuous query style that we've had in the 1.x line. And the intention is to expand that to include anomaly detection, alerting, and notification as we go forward. But that's the first step. Again, using Flux as the means for defining those tasks. And I think one of the more powerful things as you're looking at sort of Data Explorer is the Data Explorer allows you an environment to sort of play with all the configuration parameters and visualize that data before you start storing it off. It's part of expanding the sort of debugability of what it is that you put together. The other thing that's super powerful in the data exploration view is the ability to visualize the data in a raw format. So again, if you're not familiar with how Flux is outputting the data, this is also super powerful. You can see this annotated CSV style output that tells you what the columns are, what their types are, and what their usage is. And anything with the underscore is obviously a sort of internal, but it actually is a pointer to these are the values then underneath defined by that particular column. Super valuable for debugging. There's also a download to CSV if you want to play with that even further and do sort of other analysis in real time. Now there's also a task editor that's available once you've generated that task. One of the things that we'll look to do to enhance this is to bring logging information in and supplement that experience so that you have better interactive access to what's actually happening with the task, how it's executing, and what you may need to manipulate to move that forward. Okay, so that is the demo. Again, general organizational things, buckets, dashboards, tasks. You can see all the pieces that are here. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so you get a sense of what's happening with the 2.0 UI. Good, bad, indifferent? Good, a couple thumbs up. All right, super valuable for us to get your feedback on this. I have to say, like we really appreciate the folks that have already leaned in. And if you're not sure how to do that, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So again, summary, hopefully you saw evidence and examples of all of these things, right? The single unified language for tasks and query, ease of use for that telegraph configuration, secure and multi-tenant with the organizations and those tokens as first-class citizens. API, we didn't show you exactly that, but it's all under the hood for you to access. And more simplified onboarding process. That free tier is going to be available for you to use and provide great visualization on what you're actually using and how that translates into dollars. Now, one of the things we'll also do is, what's next? One of the things that we want to do from a simplification perspective is allow you to monitor your open source instance with the free tier in cloud. So we'll make it simple for you to basically take yourself on that journey to say, I'm going to send all my open source stats into the free tier in cloud. I don't have to have a separate dashboard. I don't have to monitor it. I can have my cloud instance, and wherever I'm running the open source, I have sort of free monitoring of the health and availability of that open source instance. Make it easy. And at some point, you may decide, well, I don't need to run the open source. I'll just go run the whole thing in cloud. Great. That's great. Client libraries, Paul talked about this. One of the things that we're doing is we're moving from a community-style ownership over the client libraries to us owning and driving them and certifying them to make sure that we get better consistency over the features and functions that are available in those libraries. We've had some inconsistency over time, and so we wanted to improve that going forward. So the first two that we're working on is the Go library and JavaScript, and Paul mentioned Java is also in the works, as well as C# and C, I believe. And so look for those to emerge that will make the ability for you to put the data into either any alpha, beta, cloud much easier if you're not using Telegraph. Obviously, alerts and notifications, so expanding on that capability out from what we can do with tasks in Flux today to include that. Obviously, 5 plugins is not enough from a Telegraph configurator perspective. This is another area where I think Russ Savage, who's here, this is a product manager for Telegraph, and Daniel, our lead developer, would really appreciate some feedback on the Telegraph plugins you're using most frequently. We don't have great visibility into that. We can generally guess based on the most common technologies being used, which is how we arrived at some of those first things, but we would really appreciate feedback on that particular topic. And then last in the list, but certainly not least, my commitment is to take you on a limo ride from 1.0 to 2.0. I want the limo to show up, I want you to get in, and when I want you to get out, I want you to have more capability and the same great technology that you love today. Part of that limo ride is making sure that you have support for InfluxQL, and that will handle the bulk data movement for data that you want to move from your 1.0 instance into 2.0. And if there's other things that you have questions and you want to dig into, we're certainly happy to have that discussion and conversation as well. I know there's been a lot of questions about capacitor, and we'd love to engage more deeply on that as we move forward. I put this sort of grayed out intentionally. So this is the area where we're going to land that user experience that I showed you, and then I'd like to figure out what more needs to be done to smooth that process. But there's nothing else planned at the moment other than those changes in the capacity planning and management area, because we're focused on also expanding the self-service options. So first thing, self-service data export. So I'd like to be able to provide the ability for you to either create or schedule a task that allows you to move your data from the cloud environment, let's say if you're in AWS, to an S3 bucket. You can take your trickle feed off, you can schedule when you want that to occur, and make that a fully self-serve option for you. Second, as Evan mentioned, moving to multi-cloud. This is absolutely going to happen, but we'll launch this service first on AWS, and then we'll look for multi-cloud support. How many of you hands are on using AWS that were the cloud infrastructure already? Great. Our AWS partner in the room, thanks you. Anybody looking at GCP? Couple. Anybody on Azure? 1, 2, okay. All right, so it's about an even split. All right. Again, we would love your feedback. This URL, which I realize is long, but you only have to remember the last bit, okay? Influx Cloud 2 beta. If you go to that page and you are interested in participating in the beta, put your email address in, let us know. We'll send you a notification when we're ready to have you join. All right? We would love to have you come in, play with the free tier, send some data in, play with the user experience, give us your feedback. Love to have you. Second, you don't want to do that? That's fine. We also have the alpha available. I notice not many hands go up. I know you're all busy, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your day or 2 days to come and spend with us. If you want to fire up the alpha, this is where it's available off the downloads page. We have the community forum available for feedback. Again, we're really looking for feedback on what's working / not working for you. For those Grafana users, the API is available with the Flux plugin that should be able to use that 2.0 API directly. Okay? Most important thing, right? Great open source communities make the best software. So we really appreciate all the feedback we've already gotten, your efforts on the 1.0 line, and we're looking forward to taking you on that journey to 2.0. With that, we will take questions. And by the way, you can follow me on Twitter. I need a few more followers. I think Sonia has me beat by a few thousand. So definitely take that down. I promise not to tweet anything about politics or sports or things you don't care about. It'll only be Influx-related things. You'll get the direct pipeline from me. All right, questions? Right here.
Thanks for your talk. The question is maybe not so much about the Influx Cloud, more or less about InfluxDB 2.0.
Yep.
That amazing UI that you demonstrated, will it be available for on-premises installations?
Yes.
Just open source or enterprise?
Open source.
Open source.
All integrated, single binary.
Great.
So when you fire it up, it's just there. As a matter of fact, the onboarding process for the alpha, you can't get into it until you set up an organization, a bucket, and then you generate a token. So this is one of the things, I don't know if people are watching the news about the MongoDB thing and the hijacking of the instances, kind of top of mind for people who provide platforms. So we're trying to provide that at least first layer of security before you even start the thing up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Paul, tell me your thoughts. Hold on. Oh, here's a mic for you. Nice to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you. It is just a question about enterprise licensing.
Yep.
And we have 3 servers running the enterprise database now.
Yep.
And then we have a couple of capacitor nodes and chronograph nodes but if it's one binary, what do you want us to do?
We will absolutely talk about that when we're ready to talk about that.
Okay.
So this is one of those things where
That sounds
Yeah.
not cheap.
Okay. So this is one of those hot topics of conversation, right? So as Nate Isley, who's in the room and passing out microphones, yep, he'd be happy to have this conversation with you. So a couple things, right? Number one is anytime you go through a major architectural rev that's going to include a bunch more things, we got to figure out what the pricing model is, right? So for those of you who are enterprise customers already, today we price by nodes and cores. Pretty simple. Now the question we have internally, of course, is that the way we should continue to price? We would love feedback on ways in which it's easier for you to buy from us based on how we have that conversation. And once we establish a pricing, which we haven't on 2.0, we'll then come in and figure out how you transition from 1.x to 2.x. And for me, I want to look at things like what's the equivalent workloads and how can I give you some performance visibility. One of the things I didn't mention is that the statistics that we capture in the open source will allow us to build a dashboard to show you how much it would cost you to run it in cloud. And those stats will also be available for enterprise. So you'll be able to see what's your read workload, write workload, storage workload as well. So you can make those kinds of comparisons. Now that also leads us to a different question, which is should we price on workload as opposed to price based on nodes and cores?
I think I take it with Nat because he's not so experienced in Influx.
Okay.
He's rather new now.
All right, but that we have not settled on that, and we'll absolutely be happy to have that conversation when we get there. And Nate, if you haven't met him, is deep in the throes of this with our pricing committee and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I just want to say, just from a principle point of view, the intent is not to extract more dollars from customers. The intent is to find a model that makes sense for most people. So that's why your input's really important. So
Yeah. I mean, if you looked at our core values on the website, committed to open source, right? That we're humble and seek active learning. One of the other ones is we're not greedy. So we'll be happy to.
I have yet not had any problems with you guys, so it's okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Good briefing you.
We're glad you're here. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, this gentleman over here. One second. Let's let the mic get over here. That'd be great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the migration from 1.6 to 2.0?
Sure.
Especially, we are big on AWS, and then I want to hear more about like how the migration looks from an enterprise 1.6 to enterprise 2.0,
Okay.
and from enterprise 1.6 to cloud 2.0.
Sure.
And we also big on Grafana, so
Sure.
trying to understand how it is going to look like.
So generally, our plan is for Grafana to continue to work through the query API that's exposed. So that should be a non-issue. We're working very closely with the Grafana team on Flux and their Flux visualization. So we'd like that all to continue. I would break this down into a couple of things. Number one is you probably got a lot of dashboards or existing pieces that are based off of InfluxQL. And so there is absolutely every intention for us to support InfluxQL as a language in the 2.0 line. You're not seeing it here yet, but that is something we've been working on behind the scenes. And so you'll get support for what I would call read and write compatibility on the 1.x line as you use 2.x. And it'll probably be something you need to turn on to enable that feature. Now the next question really comes down to data storage and retention policies. So from our experience, going on that journey from May of 2014 through to today, as we transition customers through different parts of that journey, there's really two use cases that appear. Use case number one is I don't care about my old data. I've got a relatively tight retention policy, say it's 60, 90 days, something like that, because I'm trying to reduce the cost in terms of storage. And so they end up doing what we call a dual write scenario, where they just add the data to the new instance, and essentially, when there's a sufficient number of days of data in the new system, just turn off the old one. That's been a strategy. Now, that's not going to work for everybody. We get that. So the second thing will be to look at bulk data handling, which then will essentially be an offline tool to convert your old shards from their current format into the 2.0 format, and then light them up in the 2.0. Does that make sense? I mean, obviously when you build in sort of multi-tenancy from the beginning, so things like the organization and all of those things will need to be inputs to say how do you want to land your data from the existing sort of database retention policy structure into bucket, first thing. We can do that one, that's easy. But the second thing is which org should be the owner, how do you want to declare the ownership over those things? That'll be the second part of the journey. Make sense? Yes. Okay. That's super important for us. We have an extraordinarily large community, which all of you are a part of, and we definitely want to take you on that journey together. So this is something that we're actively engaged in, making sure we have right. And we will actually be using our cloud customers as sort of the experimental ground to make sure that we have these tools, that they work effectively and efficiently before we put them out for your use. Okay. With that, you can catch up with, we got one more question over here, and then we got a break. I think I stand between you and lunch, which is never good.
Better you than me.
Yeah.
So
ahead.
one thing I would say is I'd be careful about the limo analogy
Yes.
when the pricing part of the conversation comes
Sure.
up.
Yeah. Well.
In the
Yeah.
migration. So
Well, I
just
don't want to
risky.
show up. Like the New York taxi analogy is also probably not a good one either. So.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
There's no champagne in the limo.
there you go. So batch versus streaming.
Yes.
It seems like it's kind of conflating in that UI to a more common interface. Is that kind of the direction?
Yeah. So currently, Flux will support batch tasks primarily. We've kind of dug into this a little bit, and we would be absolutely interested, Nathaniel, myself, Ryan, Paul, anybody here from the Influx team who's been working on Capacitor to talk in a little bit more detail if you have a streaming task and specifically why. What we're trying to shoot for is simpler, number one. Generally batch tasks running at scale, easier to manage, monitor, scope their resources. One of the really challenging things with Capacitor is debugging streaming tasks. Very common use case is people running out of memory because the tick script that they've written is sort of waiting for a bunch of stuff, and they've sort of malformed it. And they're like, is this a product defect or is it a tick script error? Right? And sort of getting to the end of that can be quite a challenge. And sometimes it's our fault, and then we fix it, and other times it's a tick script, as Paul has had some great experience on. Yep.
Yeah, if you want to talk streaming, come grab me.
Okay.
Lunch, during lunch.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Tim.